Yes! 2021 is here. That means 2020 with all its COVID-19 can go that way. Because me and my Nikon D850, we're going this way to do some photography. Attention. Everyone please return to your homes immediately as we're going back into lockdown. I repeat, please return to your homes immediately as we're going back into lockdown. Ah, Well, that lasted a long time, didn't it? Oh, unfortunately, COVID is still very much with us in 2021, and we have to prepare ourselves for these little lockdowns that are going to happen every now and again. Now, I was all ready to take you guys out on another landscape photography adventure just the weekend gone by, but unfortunately that was cut short because here in my part of Australia, we've got a new strain of COVID that has just entered the community. That being said, this has prompted me to make this video for you guys that are in lockdown to give you some ideas of the type of photography I like to do when you've got that little bit of a photography itch that just has to be scratched. Now, to prove my point, here I am lifting up my garage door and I'm going out into my front garden. Now, I went straight towards this tree because it's covered in these just newly opened pink flowers. And what I noticed was there were these little birds dancing from flower to flower, and I thought, hey, these guys look fantastic. So what I did was, with the Nikon D850, I put my 80 to 400mm lens on and got in close to get some of these shots. Now, these guys are small brown honey eaters, and they range anywhere from 5 centimeters to 7 centimeters long. I just loved the way they were just frolicking and dancing around these pink flowers, having a feast and having a bit of a laugh between each other. But I ended up getting these shots. Next, over onto my right-hand side, I noticed there was this tree out in the nature strip, and it was covered in these incredibly beautiful yellow flowers. And I started to get these shots, only this time what I did was I switched my 80 to 400mm lens to one of my favorite lenses, which is the 24 to 70mm f2.8 lens. Now, I'm pretty blessed here. I've got this really, really beautiful frangipani tree, and it's in full flowering mode at the moment, and it's just outside my front door. And just using the rule of thirds, I practiced some shots, just putting the flowers on the left-hand side, just with some nice bokeh in the background. Now, I was just about to finish up here and I thought, well, that's enough photography for today. But my wife screamed out and said, hey, have you seen all the bugs all over this frangipani tree? So I came back to investigate, and sure enough, there were little bugs all over it. So I decided to do a little bit of macro photography here. Check out this little guy on the end of this leaf. So I started walking around the tree. There was this ladybird beetle crawling on one of the leaves, and I ended up doing some more macro photography. Check out these shots that I got as it was just dancing on top of some of the flowers and leaves. Now, just when I thought things couldn't get any better, I saw this little green, I think it was a male jumping spider. I'll leave the scientific name for this guy on the screen. But seriously, this is the cutest little spider I have ever seen in my life. Have a look at those eyes and check out that mean looking mohawk on this guy. He's certainly lived up to his reputation of being a jumping spider, because unfortunately, I was so annoyed because my wife had walked inside with the other camera that I was vlogging with. But this little guy must have seen himself in my lens, and sure enough, he jumped straight onto my lens. So it was just so funny seeing this little guy on the side of my lens. He ended up jumping off. By the time I got my wife to come back out, he'd jumped off the lens and gone back onto the frangipani tree. So if you don't have a garden like mine out the front, then out the back, I've got a very small garden. It's almost like a little tiny courtyard, but I still managed to do some photography there as well. So with this shot you're seeing now, you'll see that I've practiced minimalism as well as using the lead-in lines technique from this plant. You can see the lines of the leaves are drawing the eye down onto this ladybird beetle. Now, because this ladybird beetle is bright orange and black, it really does contrast and stand out from the green leaves. Another little experiment I tried was putting some water onto these leaves. And if you get close enough, you can get some really beautiful effects of water droplets on these green leaves. Once again, I'm using bokeh, getting that nice soft background going off into the distance, with some of the water droplets in sharp focus just in the foreground. So I was just finishing up when I looked up and I looked onto a fence paling, and there was this little tiny fluorescent green grasshopper. He was basically the size of my thumbnail. So once again, using rule of thirds, I placed him over to the right-hand side of frame and just got this shot. At the time of making this video, in the southern hemisphere, we're in summer. Up in the north, I understand you guys are having a very cold winter, but there are still things you can do in your garden. Take, for example, these shots that I shot over in Queenstown in New Zealand. What I like to do in this situation is get a bright light coming from behind the ice. That way it gives you that really beautiful glow. So even on a smaller scale, you still can practice things like minimalism, because you can isolate subjects, put them on different colored backgrounds, or use that bokeh type effect where you isolate them away from flowers. Even around your home, you can practice things like macro, minimalism, hone your skills with bokeh, or using rule of thirds and lead-in lines on a smaller scale as compared to something like landscape photography that's done on a larger scale. So if you stop and look really hard enough around where you live, there are things you can photograph in lockdown. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. As I always say, never stop creating, even in lockdown, and I'll see you next week.